Welcome back. Let's start with my presentation. Development of vaccines and antivirals for combating viral pandemic. First, to introduce the background, COVID-19 is a pandemic that has caused severe economic and human casualties worldwide, and successful containment and eradication of pandemic virus is only possible with a prophylactic vaccine. In particular, in my part, I look at how antiviral drugs are related to COVID-19 and how they are applied. Viruses cannot replicate on their own. Instead, almost all replication functions depend on the host. Likewise, many viruses cannot cause damage without the host immune system. Because of this, there are strategies for antiviral drugs that block replication and anti-inflammatory drugs that can limit damage from infection. This picture is life cycle of SARS-CoV-2 and possible inhibition target of antiviral drugs. Fusion inhibitors inhibit the fusion process of viral entry, while protease inhibitors target some proteases. Some of the transcriptase inhibitors are nucleoside level transcriptase. Some antivirals target M2 channel protein after the completion of fusion. The envelope is peeled off and genomes of SARS-CoV-2 along with its nucleocapsid penetrates the host cell cytoplasm. Its genome contains often reading frame 1A and 1B, genes that produce two polyprotein PP and called PP1A and PP2B. In hosting ribosome for viral translation process, these polyproteins are then cleaved by main protease and papain-like protease to produce several non-structured proteins. Here's how to treat COVID-19 in particular using antiviral agent. It binds to our body and prevents the penetration of viruses. This is method used as an index to determine immunity in infected patients using monoclonal antibodies and to determine the symptom and severity of the virus. Favipiravir has proven efficacy against a broad range of influenza virus, including H1N1, H5N1, H7, and 9. Additionally, it may halt the replication of several other RNA viruses, including norovirus and Ebola virus. It is first oral antiviral drug approved for mild to moderated COVID-19. In 2020, lopinavir and ritonavir found not to work in severe COVID-19. In this trial, the medication was started typically around 30 days after the start symptom. Remdesivir, an antiviral agent, is currently the only drug that approved by the FDA for the treatment of COVID-19. It is recommended for use hospitalized patients who require supplemental oxygen. This is summary. Viruses mutate over time, therefore therapeutic effect may be reduced or ineffective. Molecular and monoclonal antibodies can reduce infection-related mortality and morbidity. Structure-based antigen design is important for designing a robust vaccine against COVID-19. Monoclonal antibodies are effective slowing the spread of pathogen, and antiviral agents exist as promising drug candidates targeting catalytic sites. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. So now let's talk about the vaccines in case of pandemic. Vaccines in combating viral pandemics. We all know that the vaccination is the most successful and effective strategy for controlling the pathogens. However, their development and deployment in epidemic settings have always been limited. Vaccine development consists principally of two different phases, that is preclinical trials and clinical trials. Preclinical trials consist of testing in case of animals, and it checks whether the immunity is developed or not and how many doses are actually required. The clinical trials consist of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials. Phase 1 trial consists of few number of human volunteers, and it checks whether it is safe for humans or not. Phase 2 clinical trial checks for the correct doses, the immune response, and whether it is safe or not. And the phase 3 clinical trial also checks whether it is safe or not, and it also checks the immune response in the human volunteers. And if all the answers of the questions comes yes, then the licensing and authorizing by regulatory body proceeds forward. And after licensing and authorization too, the phase 4 clinical trial continues, which checks the adverse side effects of the vaccination, and it also checks whether it is still safe or not. So now let's talk about the COVID-19 vaccines. First of all, the structure of the virus consisted of a spike protein, matrix protein, envelope protein in the surface, whereas it consists of nucleoprotein and genomic RNA in the nucleus. Depending on the constituents that are used while developing the vaccines, the vaccine approach are of three types: whole microbe approach, which consists of inactivated virus, viral vector, and attenuated virus, and the subunit approach consists of subunit viral protein, and the genetic approach consists of either RNA or DNA vaccine, depending on the type of virus. In case of current scenario, in the world right now, there are 102 vaccines that are in the phase of clinical development, 185 vaccines in preclinical development, and the vaccines that have already completed the phase 2 trial and are now in phase 4 trial is 5. And depending on the constituents that the vaccine used, the percentage distribution is as follows, that is shown in the table. In case of bottlenecks, in case of vaccine development, we need to understand that vaccine development is always a complex process, and traditionally it used to take 15 years or more than that time too. We don't know about the exact time, but in case of SARS-CoV-2 vaccine development, it only took 10 months to 1.5 years in total. It is due to the overlapping of clinical phases and the emergency authorization by the regulatory bodies. We need to consider the three things, that is the vaccine development, manufacture, and distribution of the vaccines. Except this, the possibility is always there that further bottlenecks and delay in every step of overall process, as the vaccine development is always a complex process. So now the recommendations for future pandemics. Pathogenic pandemics like COVID-19 are very much likely to outbreak in future too. It is only the matter of when. So the national governments, as well as the health organizations, always need to be prepared for the consequences. And the activities include keeping an eye on natural reservoirs harboring of potential pandemic pathogens, the good communication between health-related authorities around the world, development of prototype vaccine and novel antivirals in development of suitable animal models for testing of safety and efficacy of vaccines, and of course, the investment is always necessary, and it should be generous too. Okay, thank you.